At the Vampire King's remembrance banquet, a human widow spilled wine across the silent prince's hands, then made the mistake of asking if he was hurt. Her hands moved in a language she'd buried with her dead brother. The prince's hands flew up in answer, signing back for the first time in his life. The king, watching from his throne, went utterly still. What she didn't know, she'd just become the key to unlocking a son he'd given up for lost. Welcome to Selene's Tales, where love changes everything in the most unexpected ways. If you're new here, you're about to discover how a spilled glass of wine, a widow's secret, and a silent prince transformed an entire kingdom. Hit that subscribe button now so you never miss these tales of courage, compassion, and connection. Now, let's begin. The crystal goblets reflected candlelight like stars trapped in ice. Mira's hands trembled as she balanced the serving tray, weaving between nobles draped in midnight velvet and jewels that glittered like captured moonlight. 3 months working in the obsidian palace, and she still wasn't used to the weight of vampire eyes tracking her every breath. More wine for the high table, the head steward hissed, shoving her toward the raised platform where King Lucian sat. She'd only seen the Vampire King from a distance before, a figure carved from winter storms and battle scars, with eyes that could freeze your blood mid-pulse. Tonight he wore black armor even at a banquet, as if expecting war between courses. But it wasn't the king that made her steps falter. It was the small boy sitting beside him. Prince Arian couldn't have been older than 7. While nobles laughed around him, the child sat perfectly still, staring at his untouched plate. His small hands rested in his lap like broken wings. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. A servant rushing past knocked Mira's elbow. Time fractured. 3 crystal goblets spun through the air and crashed directly in front of Prince Arian. Blood-red wine exploded across the white tablecloth. The entire hall went silent. Mira's knees hit the floor, but her eyes found the prince first. Wine splattered across his hands, his small body rigid with terror he had no voice to release. Without thinking, Mira's hands moved. "Are you hurt?" She signed it instinctively, the same way she'd signed to her little brother Michael before the fever took him and buried that part of her forever. Prince Arian's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, suddenly filled with lightning trapped in glass. The prince's hands flew up from his lap. "I'm fine," he signed back, movements sharp with explosive excitement. "You can sign. You know how to speak like this." A smile broke across his face, the kind that hadn't seen daylight in far too long. "No one understands my hands except teacher. Are you new? What's your name?" Silence. The king's voice cut through the hall like a blade. King Lucian rose from his throne, impossibly tall, his crown heavy with blood-red rubies. He wasn't looking at Mira. He was looking at his son. Prince Arian's smile vanished. His hands froze. His shoulders curled inward, making him even smaller. The king's gaze shifted to Mira. His eyes were the color of winter storms. "You. Stand." Around the hall, nobles whispered, "Sign to the prince." Never seen him respond to anyone, just a human servant. King Lucian stopped 3 paces from Mira. "Where did you learn that?" "My younger brother was born deaf, Your Majesty." Mira's voice cracked. "I learned so he wouldn't be alone." "Where is he now?" "Dead, sire, 5 years ago." Something flickered across the king's face. He glanced back at Prince Arian, who watched them with desperate, wounded hope. King Lucian turned to his steward. "Damon, find this woman's name and post. Have her report to my study within the hour." He returned to his seat without another word. Mira spent the next hour waiting for the executioner's summons. But when Damon finally arrived, he didn't bring guards. "You are to report to the prince's wing at dawn," he said. "Your daughter will be housed with you." Mira stared at him. I'm not being dismissed." "No, Widow Lockwood, you're being promoted." because in 3 seconds, a human widow with trembling hands had done what all the king's gold and power could not. She'd made his son smile, and King Lucian would move heaven and earth to find out if it was real. The servants' quarters erupted the moment Mira returned. "Is it true?" A kitchen maid grabbed her arm. "You're being moved to the prince's wing?" "I heard she used witchcraft," another whispered. "Made him respond with demon signs. I heard she's replacing the tutors. Heard the king's keeping her as a pet. Enough." Hannah's voice cut through the gossip like a whip. She pulled Mira toward the corner bunks, away from the hungry stares. "Give the woman some air before you suffocate her with your venom." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, but their eyes lingered. Envy, fear, pity. In this palace, Mira was learning, attention was currency you couldn't afford to spend. Hannah was older than Mira by a decade, with silver streaking her dark hair and scars on her hands from 20 years of kitchen work. She'd been kind when Mira first arrived, taught her which corridors to avoid, which nobles tipped, which vampires fed exclusively from servants who volunteered. Now Hannah's face was tight with worry. "What did you do?" she hissed once they were alone. "I didn't mean to. The wine spilled and the prince looked so scared my hands moved without thinking." "Your hands?" Hannah's eyes widened. "The sign language? Mira, I told you to bury that part of yourself." "I know." "Do you?" Hannah gripped her shoulders. "There are rumors about that boy, that he's cursed, that his mother's madness lives in him. Humans who get too close to the royal family have a habit of vanishing, Mira. In this palace, the less they know about you, the safer Dara is." "Dara." Mira's heart clenched. "I need to see her." She found her daughter in their tiny shared room, barely more than a closet with 2 straw mattresses and a cracked window. Dara sat on the floor arranging pebbles in careful patterns, her dark curls falling across her face. "Mama!" The 5-year-old launched herself into Mira's arms. Mira held her tight, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood. For a moment, the palace disappeared. There was only this. Her daughter's heartbeat against her chest, small arms wrapped around her neck. "You were gone so long," Dara whispered. "I was scared." "I'm here now, little bird. I'm here." But Dara pulled back, studying her mother's face with eyes too old for 5. "You're still scared." Mira tried to smile. Failed. "How did you explain to a child that you'd accidentally drawn the attention of a vampire king? That your hands, the same ones that had signed bedtime stories to a brother you couldn't save, might have just sealed both your fates?" "Everything's going to be fine," Mira lied, smoothing Dara's hair. "We're going to be moved to a new room, a better one." "Because you helped the quiet prince?" Mira's breath caught. "How did you—" "Everyone's talking about it. They say he smiled at you." Dara's eyes shone. "No one's ever made him smile before." "No," Mira thought, remembering Michael's face the first time someone outside their family learned to sign. "But I've seen that smile before, on a boy the world decided wasn't worth listening to. The memory was a knife between her ribs. She'd failed Michael. She wouldn't fail Arian, even if it killed her." The summons came an hour before dawn. Damon appeared at her door like a shadow given form, his silver hair catching the torchlight. "The king will see you now." Mira's hands went cold. She followed him through corridors that grew quieter, grander. Marble gave way to dark wood. Torches became candelabras. The air itself seemed heavier, pressed down by centuries of power. Damon stopped before an iron-banded door. "A word of advice, Widow Lockwood." His voice was soft. "King Lucian does not waste time on pleasantries. Answer his questions directly. Do not lie, and do not mistake his interest for mercy." The door opened. The study was a world unto itself, walls lined with ancient books and military maps, a desk carved from black oak, scattered with reports and correspondence. Moonlight poured through tall windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. And there, standing at the window with his back to her, was King Lucian. He'd removed his armor. Now he wore only black leather and linen, but he seemed no less dangerous. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the moon. Scars traced the back of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. He didn't turn around. Sit. Mira sat in the chair Damon indicated, her spine rigid. Silence stretched. Then, "Where did you learn the hand language?" Lucian's voice was quiet, controlled. "The truth. From the monastery in my village, Your Majesty. They taught it to families with deaf children. My brother Michael was born unable to hear. I was 7 when I started learning so I could speak with him. And your brother is dead." "Yes, sire. 5 years ago. Fever." Finally, Lucian turned. The moonlight carved his face into sharp planes, high cheekbones, a jaw that could have been chiseled from stone, eyes that held centuries of winter. But there was something else there, too, hidden beneath the ice. Desperation. How did my son know this language? His words were precise, each one a blade. He has no connection to human monasteries, no contact with deaf servants, yet he signed back to you with recognition. Mira's mind raced. I don't know, Your Majesty, but some of his signs were different, older forms. Like he learned them from someone who studied the language formally, not from a village teacher. Lucian went utterly still. "What do you mean, older forms?" "The monastery version is simplified, but Prince Arian used some classical variations, the kind scholars use." She hesitated. "The kind that would come from monastery records, not from practice." Something shifted in Lucian's expression. He turned back to the window, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw grief ripple across his face like wind across water. "My wife," he said quietly, "corresponded with monasteries. She collected their texts, studied their methods. Queen Alessandra." The name hung unspoken between them. "She tried to teach him," Lucian continued, his voice hollow. "Before she fell ill, I thought it was just another of her fascinations. I didn't pay attention, and then she died, and Arian stopped responding to anyone, and I assumed—" He stopped, locked his jaw. The silence that followed was louder than screaming. Mira's throat tightened. She knew that guilt, had worn it like a second skin since Michael's death. If only I'd done more, learned faster, been better. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "he's not broken. He's just waiting to be heard." Lucian's hand curled into a fist against the window frame. When he spoke again, his voice was iron. "Damon, reassign Widow Lockwood and her daughter to the East Tower, servant quarters adjacent to the prince's wing. She is to assist with Arian's daily needs. Officially, she will help manage household tasks. Unofficially—" He turned, his eyes locking onto Mira's. "You will teach me if my son can truly be reached, or if tonight was merely a fluke." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You may go." Mira stood, her legs shaking. She made it to the door before Lucian's voice stopped her. "Widow Lockwood, one more thing." She turned. His eyes were the color of storms, but for just a moment she saw something human beneath the crown. "Do not make him hope if you cannot. Stay." Mira fled the study, Damon's footsteps echoing behind her with new instructions, new arrangements, new impossible expectations. But all she could think about was the leather-bound prayer book hidden in her mattress, Michael's book, filled with notes and monastery letters, and one signature she'd never dared to examine too closely, a signature that might belong to a dead queen. The king wasn't just curious. He was desperate, and Mira had just become the only bridge between a father and a son who spoke different languages, whether she survived it or not. The prince's courtyard existed in perpetual twilight. Mira stepped through the iron gate at dawn and found herself in a world designed for shadows. Night-blooming jasmine climbed stone walls, their white flowers glowing like captured stars. A fountain carved from pale marble trickled water that caught the fading moonlight. Even the plants seemed chosen for darkness: silver-leafed herbs, midnight roses, ghost orchids that only opened after sunset. It was beautiful in the way forgotten things are beautiful. And there, beside the fountain with his back turned, sat Prince Arian. He was so small, a dark-haired child in an oversized garden, clutching something wooden in his hands. His shoulders were hunched, his head bowed, as if he'd learned to make himself invisible. Mira's heart cracked. Michael used to sit like that, waiting for a world that never turned around. She took a step forward. A pebble shifted under her foot. Arian's head whipped around. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other. The widow who'd buried her voice, and the prince who'd never found his. Then Arian's face exploded with light. He dropped the wooden carving and his hands flew up in a blur of motion. "You came!" His signs were frantic, joyful, disbelieving. "You're real! I thought I imagined you. I thought maybe I dreamed the banquet and you were just another person who couldn't see me, but you're here." "Slow down," Mira signed back, unable to stop her smile. "I can't keep up when you sign that fast." Arian froze. Then, slowly, deliberately, with visible effort, he signed again. "You came back." "I came back. Why?" The question hung between them like a held breath. Mira knelt on the stone pathway, bringing herself to his eye level. "Because the king asked me to, and because I wanted to make sure you were okay. The wine didn't hurt me." Arian's signs were careful now, measured. "I've had worse spills. I didn't mean the wine." Understanding flickered across his face. He looked down at his hands, small, pale, constantly moving even when he wasn't signing, like they had too many words trapped inside and nowhere for them to go. "What's your name?" He signed finally. "Mira. I'm Arian, but you probably know that." A ghost of humor touched his expression. Everyone knows the mute prince. The bitterness in that last sign made Mira's throat tight. "You're not mute," she signed firmly. "You speak perfectly. The world just refuses to learn your language." Arian stared at her. Then his eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. "Teacher used to say that, before she left." "Who was your teacher?" "I don't remember her name. She came when I was little. She taught me signs. But then Mama got sick and teacher went away and Mama—" His hands faltered. "Mama died, and no one else could understand me anymore." Mira's heart shattered. She knew that loneliness, had lived it, had buried Michael beneath it. "I understand you," she signed, "and I'm not going anywhere." The lie tasted like ash even as her hands formed it. Over the next hour, Arian showed Mira his world, the stone collection arranged by color and texture along the fountain's edge. "This one's from the North Tower. This one I found in the kitchen garden. This one Father gave me when I was 4. It's the only thing he ever gave me directly." The wooden carvings scattered across a stone bench. "I make them when I can't sleep, which is most nights. The guards think I'm practicing to be a carpenter. They laugh about it." The careful ritual of feeding the ghost orchids exactly 7 drops of water each. "Mama planted these. If I keep them alive, maybe part of her stays alive too." Each detail was a window into a child's desperate architecture of meaning. A boy who'd built an entire universe out of silence because no one offered him words. Mira's hands cramped from signing. She stumbled over forgotten vocabulary. Arian corrected her gently, his teaching instincts clearly honed from years of trying to communicate with people who couldn't understand. "You're rusty," he signed with something that might have been a smile. When did you stop signing? When my brother died. Arian's hand stilled. Did he speak like us? Yes, he was deaf. Born that way. Did people listen to him? Not enough, not until it was too late. The prince studied her face, reading grief the way he'd learned to read everything, through expression, through the things people didn't say. I'm sorry your brother died, he signed carefully, but I'm glad you remembered how to speak to me. Me too. It was the truest thing she'd said since arriving at the palace. What Mira didn't see, the figure watching from a shadowed balcony above. King Lucian stood motionless, his hands gripping the stone railing. Below, his son's hands moved in animated conversation. The boy's face was alive, expressive, engaged, happy in a way Lucian hadn't seen since Alessandra died. And the human widow signed back with a patience that made something in Lucian's chest crack open. He is not broken, sire, Damon said quietly from behind him. He was waiting to be heard. Lucian's jaw tightened. I hired 17 tutors, 12 healers, 3 blood mages who claimed they could unlock any curse. Perhaps the problem was never a curse to unlock. Then what was it? Damon moved. Beside him, following his gaze to the courtyard below. Loneliness, Your Majesty, the kind that comes from speaking into a void and never hearing an echo. Lucian's hands clenched. He'd conquered kingdoms, ended wars, ruled with an iron fist for 3 centuries, but he'd never learned to speak to his own son. What if she leaves? The words escaped before he could stop them. What if this is temporary and he... Then you learn the language yourself. Lucian turned sharply. Damon met his gaze without flinching. You asked her to determine if the connection is real. It is. I can see it from here. The question is not whether Prince Arian can be reached, sire. The question is whether you're brave enough to try. Below, Arian's signs slowed. Will you come tomorrow? Mira hesitated. Every instinct screamed to protect herself, to protect Dara, to refuse this attachment before it became a chain she couldn't break. But then she saw Michael in Arian's eyes, the same desperate hope, the same fear of being abandoned again. And she knew she couldn't leave him alone in the silence. Not again. Yes, she signed. I'll come tomorrow. Arian's smile could have lit the darkest corner of the kingdom. On the balcony, Lucian watched his son embrace the widow, a quick, impulsive hug that Mira returned with visible tenderness. Something twisted in his chest, yearning, regret, fear. The fear that he'd waited too long, that he'd lost his son to silence while the boy was still alive. The fear that even if he tried, even if he humbled himself and learned this hand language and begged Arian to teach him, it might already be too late. Damon, he said quietly, Sire, find every record my wife kept about the monasteries, every letter, every text. I want them on my desk by nightfall. You're going to learn. It wasn't a question. Lucian's eyes never left his son. I'm going to try. In the garden below, Arian waved goodbye as Mira left through the iron gate. She waved back, and in her pocket, hidden against her heart, Michael's prayer book pressed against her ribs like a promise, or a warning. The whispers started in the noble's wing and spread through the palace like poison in wine. Have you heard? The king's assigned a human to the prince's personal care, alone with him for hours. I saw them in the courtyard. She was moving her hands, and the boy was actually smiling. Unseemly, if you ask me. What could a common widow possibly teach a royal heir? Mira heard fragments as she passed through corridors, carrying linens to the East Tower. The nobles didn't bother lowering their voices. To them, human servants were furniture, present but irrelevant. But their words had teeth. She ducked her head and kept walking, Hana's warning echoing in her mind. The less they know about you, the safer Dara is. Too late for that now. In the Hall of Mirrors, where sunlight was filtered through heavy velvet to protect vampire skin, Lord Erevan held court. He was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, all sharp edges and cold perfection. Silver hair pulled back from a face that hadn't aged in 2 centuries, emerald rings on every finger, silk robes that probably cost more than Mira's entire village, and eyes like a snake watching a mouse. The mute prince and his new companion, Lady Vess purred, sipping blood wine from a crystal glass. How progressive of His Majesty. Progressive? Erevan's smile was acid. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it, my lord? Erevan set down his own glass with deliberate precision. Desperation. King Lucian has spent 7 years trying to fix a broken heir. Now he's grasping at straws, or in this case, a human widow with parlor tricks. She's teaching the boy hand signals, Lord Corvin offered. Some monastery language for the deaf. Exactly. Erevan's voice went silk smooth. A human teaching our future king to communicate like a commoner with a disability. Can you imagine Prince Arian standing before foreign dignitaries, waving his hands like a street performer? The kingdom would be a laughing stock. Silence rippled through the gathered nobles. Lady Vess leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Erevan? I'm suggesting, he said carefully, that a king who allows sentiment to cloud judgment may not be acting in the kingdom's best interest. We need an heir who can speak, who can command respect, who can negotiate treaties without a translator. The king seems convinced the boy can be reached. The king, Erevan interrupted softly, is a grieving widower watching his dead wife's ghost dance in a servant's hands. He sees what he wants to see. We must see clearly. Lord Corvin shifted uncomfortably. You're speaking dangerously close to treason, Erevan. Am I? Erevan's smile never reached his eyes. Or am I speaking as a loyal counselor concerned about succession? Prince Arian is 7 years old and cannot address his own court. If something were to happen to King Lucian tomorrow, who would rule? A child who communicates through hand gestures? The question hung in the perfumed air like a noose. The kingdom deserves better. Erevan continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. And if the king cannot see that, perhaps the council must act. Lady Vess's eyes glittered. What do you propose? Nothing overt, nothing traceable. Erevan's fingers drummed against his glass. But if the widow were to leave the prince's service voluntarily, the king's little experiment would end, and we could return to finding a real solution. And if she refuses to leave? Erevan's smile was a winter thing. Everyone has pressure points, Lady Vess. The widow has a daughter. Mira found Hana in the laundry rooms, elbow deep in soapy water. There you are. Hana pulled her behind a rack of drying sheets, her voice urgent. We need to talk. What's wrong? What's wrong? Hana's laugh was bitter. You're what's wrong, Mira. You've become the topic of every noble conversation in the palace. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? I'm just helping the prince. You're making the nobles nervous, and nervous nobles are lethal. Hana gripped her arms. I overheard Lady Vess's handmaid. They're calling your influence unseemly, saying you're manipulating the heir. Lord Erevan himself is asking questions about you. Mira's blood went cold. Erevan? The king's chief counselor, the most powerful vampire in court after Lucian himself. Hana's eyes were desperate. Mira, please, ask Damon to reassign you. Go back to the kitchens. Disappear before... I can't. Why not? Because Arian had clutched her hand that morning and signed, You're the only one who hears me. Because she'd failed Michael and couldn't fail another child left voiceless by the world's indifference. Because the king had looked at her with desperation that mirrored her own and asked, Can my son truly be reached? but she couldn't say any of that. I can't. Hana's face crumpled. Then may the gods protect you, because I don't think anyone else will. That evening, Mira found Dara arranging pebbles on their windowsill, small stones from Arian's garden that he'd gifted her. "Mama, look!" Dara's face glowed. "The Quiet Prince gave me these. He said they're magic stones that protect against nightmares." Mira's heart clenched. "Did he now?" "He talks with his hands like you used to with Uncle Michael." Dara mimicked a few clumsy signs. "Is this right? Does this mean friend?" "Yes, little bird, that's exactly right." Dara beamed. Then her expression turned serious. "The other servants say the prince is cursed, but he's not, is he? He's just lonely. Out of the mouths of children. No, sweetheart, he's not cursed." "Good." Dara returned to her stones. "I like him, and he likes you. He told me you make him happy." Mira pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. If anything happened to Mira, if Erivan moved against her, if the nobles succeeded in driving her out, Dara would be alone, unprotected, just another human servant child in a vampire palace. The stakes had never been clearer. She was playing a game she didn't understand, with pieces she couldn't see, against players who'd lived centuries longer and killed for far less. And her daughter was the hostage she'd brought to the table. In the council chamber, King Lucian listened to reports with the patience of stone, trade agreements, border disputes, tax revenues. Then Erivan's voice smooth as poisoned honey. "And regarding the matter of the heir's education, Your Majesty." Lucian's eyes lifted. "What about it?" "Forgive my directness, sire, but the court has concerns. Prince Arian's continued inability to speak poses challenges for future diplomatic relations. Foreign ambassadors expect—" "My son communicates perfectly." Temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Erivan's smile didn't falter. "Through hand signals, yes, but in formal negotiations, when treaties must be discussed and alliances forged, silence can be interpreted as weakness. Our enemies—" "Are you suggesting," Lucian interrupted, his voice soft and lethal, "that my son is weak?" Every vampire in the room went still. This was the king who'd conquered the northern wastes, who'd ended the blood wars with nothing but a sword and will, whose anger was a force of nature. Erivan bowed his head. "Never, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that the kingdom deserves an heir who can command respect in all arenas. For Arian's own sake, perhaps alternative solutions—" "There is no alternative solution." Lucian's words could have cut glass. "My son is the heir. He will be king, and anyone who suggests otherwise can test their theories against my blade. Are we clear?" "Crystal, Your Majesty." But Erivan's eyes gleamed with calculation. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Confirmation that the king's judgment was compromised. After the council dispersed, Erivan lingered in the corridor. He watched through a window as Mira crossed the courtyard below, her daughter skipping beside her. So ordinary, so breakable. One human widow standing between the kingdom and proper order. It would be so easy to remove her. An accident, a reassignment, a quiet word in the right ear about her daughter's safety. The king would grieve, would rage, but eventually he would accept reality. The mute prince needed traditional solutions, not fairy tales about hand languages and human compassion. Lord Erivan smiled and began making plans. Arian's hands moved through the afternoon light like birds in flight. "Once upon a time," he signed, "there was a kingdom where everyone spoke with their voices, except one boy who spoke with his hands. The other children thought he was strange, so he lived alone in a tower made of silence." Mira watched from her seat by the fountain, her heart aching at the thinly veiled autobiography. "But one day," Arian continued, "a traveler came who knew his language, and for the first time, the boy wasn't alone anymore. His sign slowed on those last words, weighted with meaning. "That's a beautiful story," Mira signed back. Then gently, "But this sign," she mimicked his gesture for alone. "That's not the monastery form. Where did you learn it?" Arian's hands faltered. I don't remember. It just feels right." But Mira had seen that exact variation before, in Michael's prayer book, in the oldest letters from the monastery scholars, in the formal academic texts that predated the simplified village version. Someone had taught Arian the classical language. She watched him more carefully as he continued his story. There, another modified sign. And there, a gesture that combined two concepts in a way only trained scholars did. These weren't the signs of a child self-teaching from fragmented memories. These were the remnants of formal instruction. "Arian," she signed slowly. "Who taught you to sign? Before me, I mean." The boy's face clouded. He stared at his hands as if they held answers he'd forgotten. "There was a teacher, when I was very small, but she left." "Before that?" His eyes grew distant. "Mama." Mira's breath caught. "I remember her hands moving like yours, slowly because I was little. She would sit with me in this garden and we would practice. She said," his signs trembled, "she said one day she would teach everyone, that I wouldn't have to be alone, that the whole kingdom would learn to speak like me." The whole kingdom. Mira's mind raced. Queen Alessandra had corresponded with monasteries, had studied their texts, had tried to teach her son and planned to make it universal, just like Michael had dreamed. "What happened to your mama?" Mira asked, though she already knew. Arian's hands dropped to his lap. "She got sick. The healers came, but they couldn't help. She kept getting weaker and weaker. At the end, she couldn't move her hands anymore. She just looked at me. And I couldn't tell her I loved her because Father was there and he doesn't understand, and I—" His small body shook with silent sobs. Mira pulled him into her arms, her own eyes burning. She knew that grief, had held Michael's still hand and screamed into the void because all their secret language meant nothing when death took the only other person who spoke it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against Arian's hair, knowing he couldn't hear her voice, but hoping he felt the meaning. In her mind, a decision crystallized. She had to tell the king, not just about the signs, about the proof she'd been hiding since she arrived. Proof that his dead wife had given him the key to his son, and he'd never known to use it. That night, after Dara fell asleep, Mira knelt beside her mattress. Her fingers found the loose floorboard she'd discovered her first week in the palace, the hiding place where she'd tucked away the one possession she couldn't bear to lose, Michael's prayer book. The leather was worn soft from years of handling. The pages were filled with Michael's careful handwriting, notes about signs, sketches of hand positions, prayers written in words he'd never heard spoken aloud, and tucked between the pages, letters. Mira spread them across her lap with shaking hands. Correspondence from the monastery to families learning the language, guidance documents, instructional notes, and one letter, creased from reading and rereading, signed with a seal she'd been too afraid to examine closely until now. To the families of silent children, the language you are learning is more than gestures. It is proof that communication transcends sound. My own son has shown me that silence is not absence. It is simply a different kind of presence. I am working to make this language part of our kingdom's education. One day, children like ours will not be isolated by their difference. They will be celebrated for it. In hope and solidarity, Queen Alessandra of the House of Night. The royal seal was unmistakable. Mira's hands trembled so badly the paper fluttered. She'd known. On some level, she'd known since that first day in Arian's garden. But seeing the proof, holding Queen Alessandra's own words about her son, this changed everything. Flashback. Michael at 9 years old, signing with fierce determination. "One day, I'll teach the whole world our language, Mira. Then no one will be left out. No one will be alone." Mira had laughed, signing back. "The whole world? That's a big dream, little brother." "Big dreams are the only ones worth having." Flashback, Michael at 13, fever-bright and dying. His hands had been too weak to sign. Mira had held them, pouring words into him through touch alone, begging him to stay. But touch wasn't enough. And when he died, she'd buried the prayer book with her grief and sworn never to sign again. Because their language was supposed to change the world, and instead it had died with him in a small village room while the world kept turning. Mira pressed the letter against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Queen Alessandra had dreamed Michael's dream, had tried to make it real, and died before she could finish. But Arian was still here, still waiting, still hoping someone would complete what his mother started. And Mira had the proof that could convince his father to try. The risk was enormous. Revealing the letter meant revealing she'd hidden crucial information, meant admitting she'd known about the Queen's connection to the monastery language and said nothing. Lucian could execute her for it, but if she stayed silent, Arian would remain voiceless. The king would never know his wife had left him a roadmap to their son, and Michael's dream, Alessandra's dream, would die forever. Mira made her decision. She found Damon the next morning in the administrative wing, reviewing household reports. "I need to speak with the king," she said without preamble. Damon's silver eyebrows rose. "Regarding?" "Queen Alessandra." The steward's pen stopped mid-stroke. "That is a delicate subject, Widow Lockwood. I have information His Majesty needs to see about the Queen's studies, about Prince Arian." She met his eyes steadily. "Please, it's important." Damon studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will arrange an audience. Tonight, after the prince is asleep, the king's private study. Thank you." Mira turned to leave, and didn't see Lord Erevan step out from behind a marble column 20 paces down the corridor. Didn't see his eyes narrow as he watched her go. Didn't see the cold smile that spread across his perfect face. Erevan waited until both Mira and Damon disappeared around separate corners. Then he moved with predatory grace toward the servants' wing. The widow had information about Queen Alessandra, something important enough to request a private royal audience. Something she'd been hiding. His mind worked through possibilities. Whatever she possessed, it was clearly significant. Significant enough to potentially strengthen the king's resolve about his broken heir. That couldn't be allowed. Erevan's fingers drummed against his rings, a habit when plotting. The widow would go to her audience tonight. What she wouldn't know, she'd be walking into a trap. Because if he couldn't remove her through official channels, he'd do it through her own secrets. Everyone had something to hide, and Erevan had centuries of experience extracting confessions from people who thought themselves safe. By tomorrow morning, the widow would either be gone, or her evidence would be so thoroughly discredited that the king would never trust her again. Either way, the mute prince's little experiment would end. Erevan smiled into the shadows and began making arrangements. The king's study felt smaller at midnight. Mira stood before Lucian's desk, Michael's prayer book clutched against her chest like armor. Damon stood near the window, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. King Lucian watched her with eyes that could dissect souls. "You said you had information about my wife." His voice was controlled, too controlled. "Speak." Mira's hands trembled as she placed the worn leather book on his desk. "This belonged to my brother Michael. He kept notes about the sign language, sketches, prayers, instruction guides from the monastery." She swallowed hard. "And letters. Correspondence between the monastery and families learning the language." Lucian didn't touch the book. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because one of those letters is from Queen Alessandra." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Damon moved forward slightly. Lucian's hand slowly reached for the book, as if it might burn him. He opened it with careful precision, flipped past Michael's handwriting, past sketched hand positions, past prayers written in a dead boy's hope. Then he stopped. His fingers traced the edge of a folded letter, drew it out, unfolded it with movements so controlled they betrayed the chaos beneath. Mira watched his face as he read, watched recognition flare in his eyes at the handwriting, watched his jaw tighten at the seal, the royal mark he'd seen on 1,000 documents, letters, notes left on his pillow before Alessandra died. My own son has shown me that silence is not absence. It is simply a different kind of presence. Lucian's hand began to shake. She wrote this. His voice was barely audible. To human families. About Arian. Yes, Your Majesty. When? Mira checked the date on the letter. 6 months before she died. Damon spoke quietly from the shadows. 6 months before she fell ill, sire. When she was still corresponding with the monasteries. When she was researching... When she was trying to save our son, and I thought it was just another scholarly hobby. Lucian's words were bitter acid. I thought she was wasting time with human charity work while the kingdom needed her attention. He read the letter again, then again. She found a way to reach him. She had a plan. She was going to teach the entire kingdom, and his voice cracked. I never asked, never paid attention, never followed through after she died. The book hit the desk with a sound like a judge's gavel. King Lucian, conqueror of the northern wastes, ender of the blood wars, ruler of the kingdom for 3 centuries, buried his face in his hands. I have led armies into battle, negotiated treaties with enemies who wanted me dead, survived assassination attempts, coups, rebellions. His voice was raw. But my greatest failure is the child sleeping 2 floors above us, the son I've let grow up invisible because I was too proud, too grief-stricken, too blind to see what my wife was trying to tell me. Mira's throat tightened. Your Majesty. 7 years. He looked up, and for the first time, she saw the human beneath the crown. 7 years I've watched him drift through this palace like a ghost. 7 years I told myself he was unreachable, that he was the problem, that if I just found the right tutor, the right healer, the right solution... Your son isn't broken, Mira said firmly. He's waiting for you. The words hung between them like a bridge. Lucian stared at her. Why did you hide this? You've had this evidence since you arrived. Because... Mira's voice broke. Because reading it meant remembering Michael, meant reliving every moment I failed him, every time I wasn't enough, didn't learn fast enough, couldn't save him. Tears streamed down her face. That language was supposed to change the world. Instead, it died with him. I couldn't bear to use it again. But you did, for Arian, because I saw Michael in his eyes, and I couldn't let another child disappear into silence. Lucian stood slowly, moving to the window. Moonlight painted his profile in silver and shadow. My wife believed in a dream I didn't understand, and now a human widow is braver than a king. His laugh was hollow. What does that say about me? It says you loved your wife so much that losing her broke you, Mira said quietly. But it also means you can choose differently, for your son, before it's too late. Lucian's reflection in the glass showed a man at war with himself. Leave the book, he said finally. I need time. Mira bowed and fled. She made it halfway down the corridor before Lord Erevan stepped from the shadows. Widow Lockwood, how fortuitous. I was hoping we might have a word. Every instinct screamed danger. My lord, it's very late. This won't take long. His smile was poisonous silk. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. He led her to a small receiving room, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing. Erevan produced a folded document from his robes. I've arranged a transfer for you, kitchen supervisor in the West Wing, better pay, safer conditions, a larger room for you and your daughter. Mira stared at the papers. I don't understand. Don't you? Aravin's voice went soft. You've become a liability, Widow Lockwood. Your influence over the prince concerns the council. Your intimacy with royal matters makes nobles uncomfortable. I'm just teaching him to communicate. You're teaching him to be weak. The gentleness dropped like a mask. A future king who speaks with hand gestures instead of commands. Who needs a translator to address his own court? The kingdom deserves better. The kingdom deserves a king who listens. The kingdom deserves stability. Aravin placed the transfer papers on the table between them. Sign these. Take your daughter somewhere safe. Live quietly, or what? His smile was winter incarnate. Accidents happen in palaces, Widow Lockwood. Servants fall downstairs. Children wander into restricted wings and disappear. The king is distracted lately. He might not notice until it's too late. Mira's blood turned to ice. You're threatening my daughter. I'm offering you a choice. Leave the prince voluntarily with compensation and safety, or stay and risk everything you cannot afford to lose. He pushed the papers closer. You have until morning to decide. Mira stumbled back to her room in a daze. Dara slept peacefully, one small hand clutching Arian's gift stones. So innocent, so vulnerable. Mira looked at the transfer papers in her shaking hands. Better work, better pay, safety. All she had to do was abandon Arian, leave him alone with a father who was just learning to see him, leave him to the nobles who saw him as broken, leave him to the same isolation that had killed Michael's spirit long before fever killed his body. But if she stayed, Dara could be hurt. The choice was impossible. She almost signed the papers, picked up the pen 3 times. But every time she saw Arian's face when he'd signed, "You're the only one who hears me." Dawn found her in the prince's garden, the unsigned papers hidden in her pocket. She would say goodbye gently. Tell him she was being reassigned, make it sound normal, temporary, lie to him the way everyone else had. Arion was already awake, arranging new stones by the fountain. When he saw her, his face lit up, then immediately fell. His hands flew up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Don't lie." His signs were sharp, accusing. "Your hands are stiff. Your face is sad. Something happened." He could read her better than she'd realized. "Are you leaving?" His hands trembled on the question. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, Arian, you didn't." "Everyone leaves." His signs grew frantic. "Teacher left. Mama left. Father is here, but he's not really here. And now you're leaving too, and I don't want to." "Leave," Mira signed desperately. "But it's complicated." "Complicated means adults are lying." Tears streamed down his small face. "You said you wouldn't abandon me. You promised. I'm trying to protect you. By leaving me alone again?" His whole body shook. "I'd rather be in danger with you than safe and invisible." The words shattered something in Mira's chest. She pulled the transfer papers from her pocket and tore them in half. The torn transfer papers fluttered to the garden stones like broken promises. Arian stared at them, then at Mira, his silver eyes huge with disbelief. "You're staying?" His hands moved so carefully, as if the question itself might shatter the moment. "You're really staying?" "I'm staying." Mira signed it fiercely, definitively. "I'm not leaving you. You're my friend." The word friend seemed to unlock something in the small prince. His face crumpled, his hands dropped, and then he threw himself at Mira with the full force of 7 years of loneliness, finally finding safe harbor. He shook with silent sobs against her shoulder. Mira wrapped her arms around him, her own tears falling into his dark hair. She felt every tremor, every gasping breath, every year of isolation pouring out of this child who'd learned too young that people disappeared. "I thought—" His signs were broken, clumsy against her back. "I thought you were like everyone else. I thought I wasn't enough to make you stay." "You are enough." Mira signed against his shoulder where he could feel the movement. "You have always been enough. The world just wasn't listening." What neither of them saw, the figure standing in the shadowed archway above. King Lucian had come looking for Mira to return the prayer book, to ask more questions about Alessandra's letters. Instead, he found this, his son, his small, silent, unreachable son, clinging to a human widow like she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. And she was holding him back with a tenderness that made Lucian's chest crack open. He could hear nothing from this distance, but he could see everything. The way Arian's small body shook, the way Mira's hands moved in gentle patterns against his back. Signs, Lucian realized. She was still talking to him even while holding him. The way his son trusted her completely. Trusted her in a way he'd never trusted his own father. Damon materialized beside Lucian like a ghost. "Your Majesty, how long have I been standing here?" Lucian's voice was hollow. "Long enough to see what matters, I hope." "He's never held on to me like that." The confession tasted like acid. "Have you ever given him reason to, sire?" Damon's tone was gentle but unsparing. "Have you ever knelt to his level, learned his language, shown him you want to understand rather than fix him?" Lucian's hands curled into fists. "I hired 17 tutors." "You hired solutions, not bridges." Damon nodded toward the garden. "That woman down there. She became a bridge, and your son crossed it because she learned to speak his language, literally and metaphorically. She's a human widow who lost a brother, and you're an immortal king who's losing a son while he's still alive. Which is worse?" The question hung like a blade. Below, Arian was pulling back from Mira, signing something that made her smile through tears. The boy's face was blotchy and his eyes were red, but he was smiling. Lucian had fought wars, conquered kingdoms, survived 3 centuries of political intrigue and assassination attempts. But watching his son find comfort in someone else's arms was the hardest battle he'd ever faced. Because it meant admitting the truth he'd been avoiding for 7 years. Arian wasn't unreachable. Lucian had simply never learned how to reach him. "Damon," he said quietly, "summon the widow to Arian's chambers tonight, after the boy is ready for bed." "Sire, I'm going to do something I should have done 7 years ago." Lucian's voice was raw. "I'm going to ask my son to teach me how to speak to him." Night fell over the palace like a velvet curtain. Mira stood outside Arian's chambers, her heart hammering. Damon had summoned her with cryptic instructions. "The king requests your presence. Bring patience." The door opened. Arian's room was smaller than she'd expected for a prince. A simple bed carved with moon phases, shelves lined with wooden toys and smooth stones, a window that overlooked the garden where they spent their mornings, and standing in the center like a monument out of place, King Lucian. He'd removed his crown, his armor. He wore only black linen and leather, but his presence still filled the room like a storm barely contained. Arian sat on his bed in nightclothes, eyes wide with confusion, and Mira's heart broke to see it, fear. "Did I do something wrong?" The boy signed to Mira. "Is father angry?" "No, sweetheart, he's not angry." Lucian cleared his throat. I can't understand what he's saying." "He's afraid he did something wrong," Mira translated softly. Pain flickered across Lucian's face. The king moved closer to his son's bed, then stopped, as if uncertain where he belonged in this space, how to exist in his own child's world. "Arian," his voice was rough, I need to." He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to talk to you. I never have." The confession seemed torn from his chest. "Your mother knew. She tried to show me, but I was too busy, too distracted, too convinced I had time to learn later. And then she died and you disappeared into silence and I didn't know how to bring you back." Arian watched his father with enormous eyes. Mira's hands trembled. "Should I translate?" "He can't hear me, I know." Lucian's laugh was broken. 7 years and I'm still talking to him in a language he can't access. Some king I am. He knelt. The king of the realm, conqueror of the northern wastes, knelt beside his 7-year-old son's bed. "Mira," he said quietly, "will you teach me? Right now, one sign. I need to be able to tell him something in his own language." Mira's eyes burned. "What do you want to say?" "That he's my son, that I'm his father, that I'm sorry I failed him." She moved to Lucian's side, her hands shaking. "The sign for son is this." She demonstrated, palm curved like cradling something precious. "And father is this." Thumb to forehead, hand open. "Together, to say my son, you sign both like this." Lucian's large, scarred hands that had wielded swords and signed death warrants, fumbled through the gestures. Clumsy, imperfect, beautiful. He looked at Arian, his hands forming the signs with visible effort. "My son." Arian's breath hitched. His small hands flew up. "Again! Do it again!" Lucian repeated it, slightly smoother. "My son." Arian burst into tears, but this time, instead of curling into himself, he launched forward, throwing his arms around his father's neck with the desperation of 7 years of hunger, finally being fed. Lucian caught him, his own eyes streaming. "I'm here," he whispered into Arian's hair, knowing the boy couldn't hear but saying it anyway. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm here now." Arian pulled back, his face wet and shining. His hands moved urgently. "Teach me," Mira translated softly. "He's asking you to teach him, to keep learning. He says he's been waiting for you." Lucian's composure shattered. He pressed his forehead against his son's, unable to speak. His hands found Arian's small ones, holding them like they were made of starlight. "Teach me," he signed, the gesture rough but sincere. "Please." Arian's smile could have lit the darkest corner of the kingdom. Mira slipped toward the door, giving them privacy, but Lucian's voice stopped her. "Stay, please." He looked at her over Arian's head, his face raw and unguarded. "I'll need a translator until I learn more, and he trusts you." "He's starting to trust you too, Your Majesty." "Only because you showed me how." Arian tugged his father's sleeve, signing something quickly. "What did he say?" Lucian asked. Mira's smile trembled. "He said, 'Father's hands are big and clumsy, but I like them anyway.'" Lucian laughed, the sound rough and unpracticed. "Tell him his hands are perfect, and I'm going to learn every sign he knows." As Mira translated, she watched father and son begin their first real conversation, halting, imperfect, filled with mistakes and repetition, and absolutely beautiful. The council chamber crackled with tension 3 days before the spring procession. "Absolutely not," Lord Erevan's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "Your Majesty, the tradition is clear. The royal family appears on the balcony. The king addresses the people. We cannot..." "Cannot what?" Lucian's tone could have frozen fire. "Allow my son to participate in his own kingdom's ceremony?" "The prince cannot address the people, sire. He cannot speak." Erevan spread his hands in mock reason. "How will he greet foreign dignitaries? How will he..." "He will greet them the same way he's greeted me for the past week." Lucian's eyes were winter storms, with hands that speak more clearly than most nobles' tongues. Lady Vess leaned forward. "You cannot seriously intend to bring the boy onto the balcony." "I intend to present the heir to the throne to his people, as is tradition." Lucian's words cut like blades. "Widow Lockwood will stand beside him and translate his signs into words. The people will hear their future king speak for the first time." The council erupted. A human on the royal balcony, unprecedented, makes the crown look weak. Enough. Lucian's voice shattered the chaos. My son is not weak. My son is not broken. My son is the heir, and he will be seen. He stood towering over the assembled nobles. Any who disagree are welcome to test their opinions against my judgment in the dueling grounds. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Araven's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. As your majesty commands. But his eyes promised retribution. Hold still, Hana muttered, adjusting the clasp on Mira's borrowed gown. It was simple, dark blue linen, nothing like the noble's silks, but cleaner and finer than anything Mira had owned in years. Appropriate for standing beside a prince without looking like a servant, which was exactly what terrified her. I can't do this. Mira's hands shook. What if I translate wrong? What if I stumble? What if the crowd turns on him? Then you'll handle it. Hana gripped her shoulders. You've faced down a vampire king, torn up transfer papers in front of Lord Araven's threat, and taught a prince to smile. You can handle a balcony. Mama! Dara burst in, her face glowing. Is it true? You're going to stand with the prince and the king? Yes, little bird. The whole kingdom will see you. Dara bounced with excitement. And they'll see Prince Arian talk with his hands, and they'll know he's not cursed, he's just special. Out of the mouths of children. Mira pulled her daughter close, breathing in her innocence. What if they don't understand Dara? What if they think he's strange? Dara pulled back, her small face serious. Then you teach them, like you taught me. Such simple faith, such impossible hope. Mira found Lucian in Arian's chambers an hour before sunset. Father and son sat together by the window, Lucian's large hands fumbling through signs, while Arian corrected him with patient amusement. They looked like a family. The thought made Mira's throat tight. Lucian noticed her and gestured her in. His signing had improved dramatically, still rough, still slow, but present. Mira's here, he signed to Arian. Time to prepare. Arian's face went pale. His hands twisted together nervously. I'm scared, he signed. What if they laugh at me? What if I make father look foolish? Lucian's expression cracked. He knelt before his son, a gesture he'd repeated often this week, as if making up for 7 years of distance. He signed slowly, carefully. I'm scared too. Arian's eyes widened. You, but you're the king. Kings get scared, we just hide it better. Lucian's smile was sad. But you know what I learned this week? Hiding doesn't make you strong. Being seen does. He cupped Arian's face gently. You deserve to be seen, not hidden. The kingdom deserves to know their prince, the real one, not the silent shadow I let you become. Arian's eyes filled with tears. What if I'm not enough? You are everything. Lucian signed it fiercely, and I will stand beside you so everyone knows it. The royal balcony overlooked the grand courtyard where thousands gathered, vampires in dark finery, humans in festival clothes, children on parents' shoulders, lanterns flickering like earthbound stars as twilight deepened. The crowd's murmur was a living thing, anticipation mixed with curiosity. Mira stood to the side of the balcony entrance, her heart a war drum. Arian clutched her hand, his palms sweaty despite the cool evening air. Lucian stood tall in full regalia, crown, armor, the crimson cloak of kingship, but his eyes kept darting to his son. Ready? He signed. Arian's nod was tremulous. Lucian stepped onto the balcony first. The crowd erupted in cheers. Long live the king! Long live the king! He raised a hand for silence. The courtyard hushed like a held breath. My people, Lucian's voice carried across the space, amplified by the courtyard's acoustics. Tonight, I present to you not just your king, but your future. He extended his hand backward. Prince Arian, come forward. Mira felt Arian's hand tighten in hers. Together, she signed with her free hand. We go together. They stepped onto the balcony. The crowd's reaction was a wave. Gasps, whispers, a few scattered cheers. The mute prince actually appearing, with a human woman beside him. Arian's small form seemed impossibly fragile next to his father's warrior bulk. His dark hair caught the lantern light. His silver eyes were huge. He looked terrified and absolutely regal. Lucian's hand rested on his son's shoulder. "Prince Arian wishes to address you. Widow Lockwood will give voice to his words." The crowd went utterly silent. Arian's hands trembled. He looked up at Mira, panic in his eyes. She knelt slightly, signing where only he could see. "Just like in the garden. Pretend it's only us." He took a shaking breath and began to sign. "Thank you for coming tonight." Mira's voice rang clear. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know I am different. I know I cannot speak the way you expect a prince to speak. I know I am different. I know I cannot speak the way you expect a prince to speak. But my mother taught me that silence is not emptiness. It is simply another way of being full." The crowd stirred. Some wiped eyes. "I want to serve you one day. I want to be a king worthy of your trust. And I promise..." His signs grew stronger, more confident. "I will always listen. Even if I cannot always speak your language, I will learn. And I hope you will learn mine too." As Mira translated the final words, something miraculous happened. A child in the front row raised her hands. Clumsy, uncertain, she mimicked Arian's sign for "thank you." Then another child, then an adult, then a ripple spreading through the crowd. Hundreds of people attempting signs, rough, imperfect, but trying. "Hello? Thank you. Prince." Arian's face transformed. His eyes went wide with wonder as he watched his people, attempting to speak his language. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He signed rapidly to the crowd. "You're learning! You're really learning!" Mira laughed through her own tears as she translated, "You're learning! You're really learning!" The cheering was deafening. Lucian watched his son glow with joy. Then, in full view of the entire kingdom, the warrior king raised his own hands. His signs were clumsy, unpracticed, but unmistakable. "Proud of you." The crowd might not have known the exact meaning, but they felt it. A king signing to his son, a father speaking his child's language in front of thousands. The cheering redoubled. Arian threw his arms around his father's waist. Lucian lifted the small prince, holding him high so everyone could see. "Your prince!" Lucian's voice thundered. "Arian of the House of Night! Long live Prince Arian! Long live Prince Arian!" At the back of the balcony, forced to participate in the spectacle, Lord Aravan clapped with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His jaw was so tight it could shatter diamonds. The people weren't just accepting the mute prince. They were falling in love with him. His weakness had become his strength, his difference a bridge, and the human widow had orchestrated it all. Aravan's hand stilled mid-clap. This wasn't over, not by far. The private balcony off the king's chambers was quieter than the grand one below. Mira stood between Lucian and Arian, watching lanterns rise into the night sky like prayers given form. Below, the celebration continued. Music, laughter, the sound of a kingdom exhaling relief. Their silent prince had spoken, and the people had answered. Orion's hands moved so fast Mira could barely keep up. "Did you see the little girl in the front? She signed hello and thank you, and I signed back and she smiled. Father, she actually smiled at me." Lucian watched his son's animated signing, his brow furrowed in concentration. He caught maybe half the words, but his eyes never left Arian's hands. And there was a man with gray hair who signed Prince, but he did it backwards so it looked like servant, and I almost laughed, but I didn't want to be rude. "What did he say?" "About the man?" Lucian asked Mira quietly. "He signed Prince incorrectly, so it came out as servant." Arian found it funny, but was too polite to laugh. Lucian's smile was soft. My son has better manners than his father. He signed slowly to Arian. You were brave tonight. Arian's face glowed brighter than the lanterns. You were brave too. You learned my language even though it's hard for you. Some things are worth being hard. Lucian's signs were clumsy but sincere. Arian eventually drifted toward his chambers, exhaustion catching up with excitement. Damon appeared to escort the prince to bed, leaving Mira and Lucian alone on the balcony. Silence stretched between them, but comfortable now, familiar. Thank you, Lucian said finally, his voice rough, for giving me back my son. Mira shook her head. I didn't give him back. I just listened. No one else chose to. Lucian turned to face her fully. 17 tutors, 12 healers, 3 blood mages, countless nobles offering advice, and not one of them thought to simply learn his language. You learned it. After you showed me it was possible, after you risked everything, your safety, your daughter's future, your own grief, to reach a child you barely knew. His eyes held hers. Why? Why did you stay when Erevan threatened you? Why did you tear up those transfer papers? Mira looked out at the lanterns. Because I saw Michael in Arian's eyes, and I couldn't let another child disappear into silence just because the world was too lazy to learn how to hear him. Her voice cracked. I failed Michael. I couldn't fail Arian too. You didn't fail your brother. I didn't save him. Some things cannot be saved, Mira. Only honored. Lucian's hand rested on the balcony rail near hers. You honored Michael by refusing to let his language die with him, by giving it to my son, by forcing a kingdom to see what they'd been ignoring. Mira's throat tightened. What happens now? Now? Lucian's smile was tired but genuine. Now we change everything. The next morning, King Lucian issued a royal decree from the throne room. By order of the crown, sign language instruction will be incorporated into palace education for all residents, nobles, guards, servants, and children alike. Funding will be provided to human villages to establish teaching programs. Monasteries will be commissioned to train instructors. His voice rang through the hall, brooking no argument. No child in my kingdom, vampire or human, noble or common, will ever again be voiceless because we are too proud to learn. Communication is not a privilege. It is a right. Lord Erevan sat rigid in his council seat, his face a carved mask. He did not protest. He knew when a battle was lost. Within days, the palace transformed. Servants practiced signs in corridors during breaks, their hands fumbling through good morning and thank you. Hannah cornered Mira in the kitchens, her hands forming a careful, deliberate sign. Friend, she signed, then grinned. Did I do it right? Mira's eyes burned. Perfect. In the guards' training yard, soldiers learned tactical signs for silent communication during patrols. Danger. Retreat. All clear. What began as accommodation for a prince became practical advantage, and in the gardens Dara and Arian sat together, teaching each other. Dara showed him a flower. Arian signed its name. Dara mimicked the sign, giggling when she got it wrong. They looked like siblings. Mira watched from a bench, her heart full to breaking. That evening, Arian appeared in his father's study, a space he'd avoided for years. Lucian looked up from correspondence, surprise flickering across his face. Will you tell me a story? Arian signed. With your hands, like Mama used to. Lucian's breath caught. I don't know many signs yet. I'll make mistakes. I don't mind. I like your mistakes. They mean you're trying. Simple words, devastating impact. Lucian gestured to the chair beside his desk. Arian climbed up, settling in like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. Mira, summoned to help, sat quietly in the corner as Lucian began. Once upon a time. His signs were slow, uncertain. Mira whispered corrections when he forgot words. Arian waited patiently when his father paused, struggling to remember the sign for dragon or kingdom. But Lucian didn't give up. He told a story about a king who lost his way in a dark forest and a small prince who carried a lantern to guide him home. The metaphor was transparent and perfect. By the end, Arian was leaning against his father's shoulder, his eyes heavy with sleep. "That was a good story," he signed drowsily. "Will you tell me another tomorrow?" "Every night," Lucian signed back, "for as long as you want." Mira left them there. Father and son curled together in the study's leather chair, Lucian's large hand unconsciously forming the sign for "my son" against Arian's back even as the boys slept. A loop finally closed, a family finally whole. In her small room, Mira pulled Michael's prayer book from its hiding place one last time. She traced the worn leather cover, opened to pages filled with her brother's careful handwriting, reread Queen Alessandra's letter about making silence into presence. Then she placed it on the small shelf above Dara's bed, not hidden, not buried, honored, alive. Because the language inside these pages was no longer a relic of grief. It was the living tongue of a kingdom learning to listen. Michael had dreamed of teaching the world. He died believing that dream impossible. But Mira had carried it forward. And now, in a vampire palace under a king who'd learned to sign, "my son," that dream was becoming real. Mira thought of the terrified widow who'd walked through the palace gates 3 months ago, head down, hands hidden, voice silenced by grief and fear. That woman had wanted to disappear. Instead, she'd helped an entire kingdom see. The next morning, Mira found Arian and Lucian in the garden, practicing signs together. The king's hands were still clumsy. The prince's corrections were still patient. But they were speaking, really, truly speaking. Arian noticed Mira and waved excitedly. "Father learned 5 new words last night. Watch." Lucian rolled his eyes but signed carefully. "Good morning. Beautiful day. My son. My friend." Then he looked at Mira and signed one more. "Thank you." Mira signed back, "No, thank you." Because this family finding each other, this kingdom learning to listen, this language rising from grief into joy. This was everything Michael had believed possible, everything Alessandra had died trying to create, everything Arian had waited 7 years to receive. And it had all started with one terrified widow who chose to let her hidden hands speak. Above them, lanterns from last night's celebration still hung in the trees. Below them, the kingdom was waking to a new world, a world where silence was no longer isolation, where difference was no longer defect, where a mute prince could become a beloved heir, all because one person decided to listen. In the garden, Arian laughed, a sound only felt, not heard, and Lucian's hands moved in answer. "My son," over and over like a prayer finally answered. And that's how a language born from grief became a bridge between worlds, how a widow's hidden hands changed a kingdom, how a silent prince found his voice, not by speaking, but by teaching others to listen. If this story touched your heart, hit like and subscribe for more tales where love and courage change everything. Drop a comment. What would you risk everything to protect? I read every one. Thank you for listening. Until next time.